que decírselos de nuevo, no hay plata. La conclusión es que no hay alternativa al ajuste y no hay alternativa al shock.
Last year, new Argentine President Javier Milei was elected primarily due to one key premise. He was different.
No hay alternativa al shock.
Voters, battling a worsening economic crisis, were fed up with the two main political parties and chose to elect a relative outsider who argued Argentina's bankrupt state was the result of a decades-long government addiction to printing money to fund out-of-control social programs. Milei says the only way to achieve future stability is to jolt the economy by pulling all the plugs, cutting social spending, deregulating the economy, and selling state companies to private owners. But while his rhetoric may be distinct, Milei's economic dogma is anything but.
Y no hay alternativa al shock. Y no hay alternativa al shock.
Throughout Argentine history, governments working in collaboration with Washington and US-led finance have harnessed upheaval to legitimize external debt and justify shock therapy policies, enriching the few at the expense of the many, while making Argentina more vulnerable to future crises. Putting fresh wrapping on age-old strategies, Milei is once again selling the poison as the cure. I'm Amelia Reyno, an independent journalist from the US, living in Buenos Aires since late 2021. This is a story about how 7 decades of US interference contributed to Argentina's crisis of today. And this is the final chapter. Economic shock therapy describes a set of policies, at their core, social cuts, deregulation, and privatization. Originally envisioned in the US as a blueprint for rapidly transitioning economies to pure deregulated capitalism. These policies, clearly harmful to the majority, were deeply unpopular around the world, but the US government saw great potential for growing investments and profits and sponsored their implementation throughout South America, often taking advantage of or helping to create a catastrophe in order to manufacture public consent. But as global politics changed, so did tactics. Military regimes were out. Credit regimes were in. And in Argentina, external debt turned out to be the ideal shock therapy wingman. How has this formula manifested? The first stage is cutting social spending to free up cash. Stage 2 is selling state assets to grow reserves in the central bank. To increase the attractiveness of those assets, Stage 3, deregulating the economy to open the country to foreign business and eliminating capital controls, ensuring that profits earned in Argentina can leave unrestricted if crisis hits. But what if, as a result of these measures and the underlying economic issues that they exacerbate, more capital flees the country than what is saved or earned? The elimination of capital controls, in combination with Argentina's exchange rate pressures and the perpetual expectation of devaluation, also encourages hot money, profits made on buying and selling currency, which results in capital outflows without any investment or productive benefit. To account for these losses, foreign loans, most notably from the US-controlled International Monetary Fund, become a necessary tool for maintaining a sufficient stock of reserves in the central bank. Historically, however, such debt has instead become a vicious cycle, used not to fund development projects, but to compensate for capital flight and pave the way for more. In the case of the current IMF debt, a record-breaking loan accepted in 2018, a report from the General Auditor shows 66% went not to build hospitals or schools, but to finance capital flight. Using loans this way has obvious consequences when it comes time for repayment, and Argentina's chronic inability to pay would seem to give lenders pause, unless, of course, repayment is not the only goal. Another major mode of capital flight in Argentina comes via subsidies offered to foreign multinationals as incentives to do business within the nation, dollars that often enter the country as loans. The US is Argentina's top foreign investor, with more than 300 companies operating in the nation.
The foreign companies which appropriate these dollars are the same that control the IMF or the World Bank. So why they give money to Argentina? Because they want to save Argentina, because they are thinking on poor people in Argentina? No, because they know that their companies need those dollars. So what was a transfer from the IMF through the state to their own companies.
Meanwhile, the state is left bankrupt. Facing emptying state coffers, Argentine governments have been forced to print money to fund basic functions, social programs among them. A monetary policy that blunts the population's pain, but also spirals inflation. But for those who see economic crisis as financial opportunity, this offers another one. Even if the IMF doesn't exploit repayment failure as an opportunity to enforce austerity, shock therapy by another name, the inflationary crisis it triggers can itself lay the groundwork. Last year, public anger over skyrocketing prices and growing poverty paved Milei's ascent, even earning him cheers when in his inaugural address he acknowledged the suffering that will accompany el último mal trago, the last bitter medicine. As it turned out, this crisis was just the catastrophe needed to justify shock therapy's return. If we looked at Argentina from outer space, what would we see? A nation fertile in soil and climate, in rare minerals and fresh water. A land with nuclear technology, high literacy, a history of innovation and arts, and a relatively small population to feed and care for. Rich by any measure. But since its inception, Argentina has been systematically robbed of its material wealth. The U.S. government and U.S.-led finance are far from the only actors who have contributed to Argentina's decline from one of the world's wealthiest nations to one plagued by perpetual economic collapse. Many factors, including local corruption and mismanagement, political upheaval, and just plain bad luck, deserve a share of the blame. But after 7 decades of political and economic meddling, the U.S.'s powerful role in conditioning Argentina's fate should not be ignored either. Over the years, various arguments have been used to justify the U.S.'s evergreen presence in Argentina's affairs. First, it was about containing Nazi influence, then fighting communism, now about countering China's regional advance. Behind every geopolitical pretext lie economic rationales, the pursuit of convenient policies, no matter the cost, in order to conform external economies to the U.S.'s internal needs. Despite this painful history and the immense economic challenge of the moment, Argentina still holds enormous potential thanks to emerging oil and lithium reserves, which present an arduous but possible path out of economic collapse. What Milei promises, mass privatization, will help solve immediate cash flow problems, but reduce the nation's long-term capacity for growth and pave the way for Argentina to be robbed of its resources yet again. But there's one other factor in play. As many times as Argentines have been pushed down in the face of government failure, foreign interference, and economic crisis, they have gotten up and fought back, taking the streets and demanding accountability.
Nosotros los argentinos me parece que no somos un pueblo diezmado.
We are not a decimated
Aunque
people.
bueno, vamos creciendo y vamos teniendo.
Although we are growing and have had moments of differing maturity, we always go to the streets.
Somos resistentes,
We
somos de
resist.
salir a la calle. En este caso,
In the case of Milei, in the face of what many of us interpret as reforms benefiting the powerful classes
no a las clases más desfavorecidas,
and not the
pido
rest,
que nos quedemos tranquilos.
we're not going to stay on the sidelines and watch. From the streets, el pueblo argentino will have a say in what chapter comes next.